Hello, everyone. We're back here to continue with your discussion on the digestive system. Up to this point, again, we covered the first half, or more than the first half of the digestive system. We look at the GI tract from basically the mouth, the pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestines, and we left off there. So this will continue looking at some of the accessory glands that secrete enzymes, that secrete different bile, different substances into the duodenum of the small intestines. So we're going to continue with small intestine accessory organs, and then continue into the colon here. Right? So let me get this going. All right, so if you remember the anatomy, we leave the stomach, right? This chyme, basically the food that was on the plate was converted into that bolus, that food mass in the stomach, mixed with digestive juices, acids, enzymes. Now we talk about bile, or I'm sorry, about chyme, right? So chyme then entering into the duodenum of the small intestines. In the duodenum, we're going to receive then the bile from the liver, right? And we talked a little bit about this with the last discussion. I'll just highlight it again some more here. The gallbladder then being that little pouch, if you will, little sac on the ventral surface of the liver, which will store excess amounts of bile. Right? And bile, we know, is necessary for the continued digestion of lipids, of fats, right? It's a little bit challenging to break down fats. There's a lot of covalent bonds. It takes a lot of effort and work to sort of allow those fats to break apart. Remember, they are nonpolar, so they're not going to be interacting with water. So you have that polarity, non-polarity, that is the lipids, and so they need a little bit of extra processing, right? These emulsifiers like bile will help to digest them further. So also receiving information from the pancreas, or I should say the duodenum is also receiving information from the pancreas. So the pancreas, we know, is involved with insulin production. And it's also going to secrete this pancreatic juice, right? Pancreatic juice, which is a mixture of a bunch of active and inactive forms of enzymes. So chemotrypsin, all of its peptidases, right? So all of that coming into that first region of the small intestines that we know of as the duodenum or duodenum. Just showing you how they're produced and then how they will be released out into the duodenum. So pancreatic juice. We go from a very acidic pH in the stomach to now an alkaline pH. And again, basic chemistry. Why would we have some alkalinity in this first part of the small intestines? Well, because we're coming, this acidic chyme is coming into this area. We don't want that acidity to damage the walls, the lumen of the small intestine. So we neutralize the acidity with this alkaline pH. Pancreatic juice will also have bicarbonate ions for the buffering as well, and a series of enzymes, right? Breaking down carbs, breaking down lipids, breaking down nucleic acids. So proteases are also going to help to break down proteins. So you can imagine, if there is trauma, damage, cancer, if there is some aspect where the pancreas is not at its optimal level, you're going to have all of these pancreatic juices that are not being secreted, and it's going to have a very negative impact on the digestion of all macromolecules, the buffering aspect of this area as well. So just several problems here. You need your pancreas to function properly. So digestion in the small intestines, the chyme from the stomach contains partially digested carbs and proteins, undigested fats. So the fats are not digested until they reach this point. And here we start fat digestion with the help of the bile coming from the liver. Right, motility, we've talked about our segmentation, right? Segmentation, peristalsis, all of this can happen in the small intestines. So we talk about now the ileocecal sphincter. So now we're talking at the distal part of the small intestines, right? So the pyloric valve at the proximal part of the small intestines allows chyme to enter into the small intestines. Now we have another sphincter, the ileocecal sphincter, that allows chyme to be moved from small intestines into the large intestines or the colon. So little flap, we talk about these little valves. These valves help to keep material moving in a single direction. We saw valves in the circulatory system in the vessels, and we see valves also now within the gastrointestinal tract. So before I get this far, so let me sort of back up here. So once we have digested what we can in the small intestines, we've absorbed what we can. The non-usable, non-digestible parts of the chyme then are going to be moved onwards. So we can say that there is a relatively nutrient poor consistency of the chyme, right? What it does have, though, is a fair amount of water. So there's still a fair amount of water in the chyme, and we have very minimal non-absorbed nutrients at this point. So here we have some anatomy. So the tinea, the haustra, epiploic appendages. So let me show you what these sort of look like here. I'll come back to this slide. So we left our story right about here, right here, this area, the ileum, the last distal part of the small intestines. This little valve right here, little sphincter, circular muscle, we call the ileocecal valve. Once we've absorbed what we can see all the blood vessels here, a lot of capillaries that are non-visible would be surrounding all within this mesentery. We've absorbed all the nutrients that are possible to be absorbed. Then we move the chyme when the ileocecal valve relaxes. So that chyme is dropped off here, and it hits kind of like this dead-end pouch called the cecum. Right? The cecum is the first sort of area that the chyme would sort of be dumped into. There's a little sort of dead-end pouch right here, a little dead-end, almost like a finger-like appendage. I think you know of this. You know the appendix, right? So the appendix is this little sort of small finger-like extension off of the sort of cecal area here. So again, the ileocecal valve separating the ileum from the cecum. That's where we get the name from. So as we're in the cecum, then we progress up the ascending colon, the transverse colon, descending colon, the sigmoid colon, the rectum, and then finally the anal canal. So this is where these vocabulary terms are coming into play, right? The cecum, the colon, the rectum, and the anal canal. So the part here, right? So the cecum, the colon, the rectum, and the anal canal. These terms here, the tinea coli, right? You think of coli referring to the colon. You may have heard of the bacteria E. coli, also referring to the colon. That's where you would find a healthy population of E. coli in your system. So referring to the colon, these are bands of longitudinal muscles in the muscularis, right? So in one of the tunics, right? Longitudinal muscles going parallel with the GI tract. Haustra, pocket-like sacs caused by the tone of the tinea coli, right? And I'll show you pictures of that. Epiploic appendages, fat-filled pouches of visceral peritoneum, right? So here we see the little epiploic appendages. little fat accumulations there. You see these like basically again the hostra are these like almost like little segments. Go up, down, up, down, up. These little segments there making up then the hostra, and these are controlled by the contraction, the segmentation of the smooth muscle inside of the colon wall. So this position, peritoneal, retroperitoneal, the position of where they lay, right? So the intestines are sort of inside of the mesentery. The colon lies sort of external. So we call sort of, as I mentioned here, ascending colon, descending colon are retroperitoneal. They're behind, they're outside behind that peritoneal area. So we have like a sagittal view here, looking at all the cuts, all the sort of the positions. I'm not going to get that involved here. So the rectum and the anus, right? So the rectum basically is a series of valves, a series of sphincters that stop the feces from being passed with the gas. So the anal canal in the last segment of the large intestines, and two sphincters that are of notice here. Internal anal sphincter, external anal sphincter. Internal anal sphincter is a smooth muscle sphincter, meaning it's sort of out of your voluntary control. And the external anal sphincter is skeletal, so it is of voluntary control. You can control this one. You have no say in the matter in reference to this one, right? Internal anal sphincter, autonomic. External anal sphincter, voluntary. So within our, kind of showing you here, here we have the, again, the internal anal sphincter. So internal anal sphincter is a little bit deeper in. So it goes all the way around that, that rectum, right? So as that sphincter is closed, that will prevent any of the waste to be defecated out. Again, we have no control over that, but sort of more superficial around than the internal anal sphincter is the external anal sphincter. So external anal sphincter then will sort of be a voluntary way of keeping the internal anal sphincter closed. But again, let's go back to when you were a kid, right? Little kids in diapers, well, whenever they start to build up enough pressure, that internal anal sphincter is stretched, and the more it's stretched, we learn, the more forceful the contraction, right? So then they poop, they defecate, yeah. So again, if maybe you didn't eat something that settled well, or you ate something that didn't settle well, things are not looking good, there's not a bathroom close by, you're going to have to work really hard to keep those external anal sphincters to forcefully close in that internal anal sphincter. But once again, that sphincter is stimulated enough, you're going to have an accident on your hands, right? So be aware of the anatomy. And if you have conscious control, you haven't had an embarrassing moment in a long time, since we were kids maybe, in diapers, we can say thank you, external anal sphincter, for keeping us, from those embarrassing moments. Now, another thing that you may have heard of, we look at these veins. So obviously there's muscles. Muscles have to be supplied with blood flow for oxygen, for nutrients, and then that blood has to be returned back to the heart. So we have then these veins that you know of as the hemorrhoidal veins. So if these veins start to become prolapsed or start to become inflamed, there's various reasons. There's a lot of force that can be compressing on them. There's levels of dehydration that may be affecting them. So then the person could have inflamed hemorrhoid veins that they know of as hemorrhoids, right? So that's where that term comes from. So hemorrhoids are veins. So again, coming back here, that's all within here. So there's that circular ring, the external anal sphincter. And again, talking about there, the hemorrhoids, superficial venous plexus of the anal canal form the hemorrhoids. And the hemorrhoids can be inflamed, they can be swollen, they can be prolapsed. Those valves can become deficient. And functions of the large intestine. So we've established that most of the nutrients are going to be absorbed by the small intestines. The large intestine's primary role is to reclaim water. Right? So we have to maintain water balance within the large intestines. So another major aspect is the propulsion of the feces, right? So feces are going to be released from the body here. And because the colon is involved in an idea of sort of nutrient, or I should say the small intestines is involved in nutrient extraction, the colon, which is just water-based, is not essential for life. So a person can live without a colon, right? This happens when they have cancer, if there's some sort of trauma. But yeah, a colon is nice to have, but it's not necessarily vital for sustained life. I don't know if you've heard of people having to have these little colostomy bags that, in essence, they sort of defecate through the ileocecal valve, and then they're basically in little pouches, things like that. So, if the colon doesn't do its job properly, so the colon is healthy, but if it now starts to extract too much water, so we're extracting too much water from the colon, so basically we can have a state of I should say a health issue, not an issue, but constipation can be a factor. So the feces become too dry. If we are not absorbing enough water from the colon, then we can have a state of diarrhea, right? And that's, again, too much water being released out. And my little dog keeps snoring here. So let me scoot her along. Go. Move it. All right. So the idea of large intestines now, right? The large intestines are going to move material out in the defecatory process, and it will happen with these slow segmenting movements of the haustra. So the haustra are going to kind of have what we call bulk flow. They're going to contract slowly and kind of move along the path, right? I don't know if this has happened to you. I suspect it has at some point. Sometimes it's convenient, sometimes it's embarrassing, but maybe you're in a quiet test. In the old days, right, we were taking a test in a class, and all of a sudden, you hear this, it's like this bulldozer moving through the colon, as we have this large haustral contraction moving the chyme and the non-digestible aspects along the path there. So again, that's haustral contractions. You can't control those, right? So they are autonomic. They will happen multiple times a day. Some of you are very regular, so it will happen multiple times. Some of you not so regular, it will happen fewer times. But that is going to kind of be a big force, big help, assistance of the actual defecation process. So again, 3 or 4 slow, powerful peristaltic waves per day, which are these mass bulk flow movements of waste movement. Yeah. And defecation, mass movements force feces into the rectum. We have this reflex, parasympathetic signals. So the actual process of defecation is parasympathetic. So I know some people, you travel, you don't feel comfortable, you're nervous, you're excited. A lot of times the system kind of shuts down and the person is unable to defecate because they're just too excited, right? So they're sympathetically stimulated. In order to have normal defecation, it is required to be in a parasympathetic level. So in order to defecate, again, there's a relaxation of both the internal and the external sphincters that allow then for defecation. And with that, that concludes our discussion on the digestive system. So again, I don't think that was too difficult. Soak it all in, sort of make sense of what you can, and keep an eye out then again for the next discussion, which will be the urinary system. So with that, again, I will call it a day with this chapter, and we'll move on to the next.